Not business as usual. India's reputation for high quality generic drugs should not be put at risk. The pharmacy of the global south is facing a crisis of reputation after cough syrups made by pharmaceutical companies based in India, which had unacceptable amounts of diethylene glycol or ethylene glycol, killed 66 children in Gambia, 65 children in Uzbekistan in 2022, and 12 children in Cameroon in 2023. And India made eye drops contaminated by drug resistant bacteria, killed 3 persons, and blinded 8 in the US again in 23. And Spotlight is back on Indian drug companies for all the wrong reasons. A BBC Eye investigation has brought to the light criminal actions of Aveo Pharmaceuticals, of Maharashtra-based Aveo Pharmaceuticals, a Maharashtra-based company, which was manufacturing and exporting unapproved, highly addictive opioid drug combinations to West Africa. The medicines contain tapentadol, a powerful opioid, and carisopropidol, a highly addictive muscle relaxant. While the Indian drug regulator has approved tapentadol and carisoprodol as standalone drugs, the combination has no clearance, even if the companies claim that the drug combination has been approved by the state drug authority turns out to be correct. It is still illegal as only Central CDSCO can approve any novel fixed-dose combination drugs for safety and efficacy. It is only after this approval that state drug authorities can issue a manufacturing license. The state ministry routinely banning FDCs is only because state drug authorities ignore this provision in the law with impunity. India questioned and denied at the World Health Organization's report about lethal cough syrup sent to Gambia, but the latest case, CDSCO, and state regulatory authorities swung into action even in the absence of any complaint by the West African countries. The reason? The BBC investigation irrefutable video evidence that the company was in business of manufacturing and exporting the dangerous combination drug despite the harmful effects. The seizure of nearly 13 million medicines and 26 batches of active pharmaceutical ingredients of tapentadol, tapentadol and carisoprodol, tapentadol and tapentadol and carisoprodol are clinching evidence for taking criminal action against the company, while the moves by the authorities to issue a stop activity order, withdraw the manufacturing license and permission to export the drugs by any company, and show cause notice inspire some confidence. Only stringent punishment can serve as a deterrent. Indian pharmaceutical companies are known in the global south for their high quality generic drugs. It is for their drug regulator to ensure that India continues to be a famous for this and not gain notoriety for producing and exporting deadly synthetic opioids as drugs. Manufacturing synthetic opioid drugs cannot be pharmaceutical companies' business. Germany need to talk to Russia to drive a hard bargain for Europe. When Germans went to vote on Sunday, one of the most consequential elections in the country post-reunification history, there was little doubt about the outcome. Olaf Scholz-led three-party coalition has collapsed months earlier, and his centrist Social Democratic Party was hugely unpopular. Germany, once again hailed as a model country, was in its third year of economic contraction, and far-right alternative for Germany, with its neo-Nazi roots, was surging ahead with anti-establishment and anti-immigration campaign. In the result, the conservative Christian Democratic Union and its Bavarian sister party Christian Social Union, led by Friedrich Merz, emerged as the largest bloc with 25% vote share, while the AfD doubled its vote share to 20%. The Social Democrats got 16% share, one of the worst performance, while the Greens won 11%. The left wing Die Linke saw rising popularity with 8%. Mr. Merz has asked voters for a strong mandate to fix Germany's problems. While the CDU's performance is weaker than expected, its strong lead puts it in the path towards power. He will now kick off a complicated process of coalition talks. Mr. Merz has already ruled out any alliance with AfD, which would be allocated 152 seats in a 630-member Bundestag. Coalition needs at least 316 seats to form a government, so it is likely that Mr. Merz, whose bloc has 208 seats, would form a two-party coalition government with Social Democrats with 120 seats. But government formation would be least of his challenges. He must reboot a contracting economy which has barely grown since pre-COVID years, tackle the immigrant population problem which was exploited by the far right, and formulate foreign policy that addresses both Ukraine war and Europe's security challenges. As Germany joined Western allies in imposing sanctions on Russia, it effectively lost access to cheap Russian gas. The country is today grappling with a deep recession and deindustrialization, as the crisis deepened, German ally elites bid to weaken the AfD through political farewell ceased working, but Mr. Merz has the advantage of leading a new government on a new mandate. He should look at the US reset with Russia to begin afresh rather than as an impediment to further the old policies that have backfired. His focus should be on bringing the Ukraine war to a quick, just end and rebuilding the economy. He should just end and he should also drive a new hard bargain with Russia for security and stability in Europe. Only a peaceful Europe can guarantee Germany's continued rise as the continent's economic and political engine. Fencing out interfaith relationships in the new India. On January 27, 2025, Uttarakhand became the first Indian state to implement the Uniform Civil Code, placing private relationships under state surveillance. The official claimed that it would restore gender justice, create uniformity, and address administrative oversight. Restore gender justice, create uniformity, and address administrative oversight. However, when taken along the existing anti conversion laws, this marks the coordinated legal push to segregate communities, not just in faith, but also in love and daily life. The UCC is the final blow, ensuring that all forms of interfaith relationships are regulated in the new India. Interfaith marriages already face immense social barriers. A survey of over 70,000 respondents found that fewer than 10% of urban Indians had a family member who married outside their caste. Interfaith unions were even rarer. Barely 5% of urban respondents reported any marriages in their family outside their religion. The Secular Special Marriage Act 1954 has administrative hurdles, including a mandatory 30-day notice period, subjecting couples to scrutiny. Meanwhile, rigid anti conversion laws now enforced in Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Rajasthan among several other states, has further criminalized religious conversions for marriage. These laws create bureaucratic traps as mandatory declaration, waiting periods, and district magistrate approvals that deter conversions for marriage. Worse, they embolden vigilante groups, often linked to right wing organizations, to justify harassment, policing, and violence against interfaith couples, particularly Hindu Muslim. A news portal found that at least 63 of 101 police complaints invoking the UP anti conversion law against Christians were filed by third party vigilante groups. Instead, by protecting individuals, these laws provide legal cover for extrajudicial interventions, often with bullish complexity. Against this background, the UCC's provisions on live-in relationships takes great state scrutiny to a new extreme. Even informal relationships are subject to surveillance. Live-in relationships are now legally required to be registered with district authorities. This includes a 16-page application with official documentation, Aadhaar card, substantial proof, seeking approval form, religious leaders or community heads, and notifying family members. The registrar must inform the couple's parents or guardians about their relationship. Failure to register is punishable up to 6 months of imprisonment and a fine of 25,000. These rules make it nearly impossible for couples, particularly interfaith ones, to live without oversight. It is no surprise then that only one live-in couple has successfully registered its relationship in Uttarakhand. Others have sought legal protection from the High Court. Even as Bajrang Dal leader claims to have sought source details on live-in applications. The ability of such vigilante to interfere in private relationships underscores how the UCC and anti-corruption laws work in tandem to suppress interfaith unions. The result is a complex legal machinery that is actively working to segregate communities, entrench religious divisions, and institutionalize a form of social apartheid. Individuals cannot marry or even be in a relationship with a so called other without prioritizing legal approval. These laws create barriers for interfaith couples at every stage, whether in marriage or informed cohabitation. This combined system functions in three ways. First, by strengthening traditional religious institutions, the requirement for religious certification in both UCC and anti conversion laws formalizes the power of religious leaders over personal relationships in a secular democracy. This contradicts the constitutional guarantee of individual freedom, reinforcing the idea that relationships must adhere to religious and community norms rather than personal choice. Second, by enabling families to exercise greater control over women, both laws disproportionately impact women who often face pressure, coercion, or even violent punishment for engaging in interfaith and intercaste relationships. The UCC makes women more vulnerable to honor-based violence and familial control. Women in interfaith relationships are often framed as victims of manipulation, stripping them of agency and reinforcing patriarchal control over their choices. Third, by providing legal cover for vigilantism, right-wing vigilantes now have a legal framework to monitor, report, and harass interfaith couples, married and unmarried, under the guise of preserving tradition and the law. When an interfaith couple attempts to register, live in relationship, or convert for marriage, vigilante groups are often first to show due to the legal requirement of public notices and family notifications. Amid rising hate speech and polarization, these laws effectively legalize and entrench the separation of religious communities, preventing interfaith interaction at all levels. Similar to apartheid era South Africa or Nazi Germany, which banned interracial unions, the effect of the UCC and the anti conversion laws is to institutionalize segregation by making interfaith relationships, whether marital or informal, almost impossible. Looking ahead, Uttarakhand's UCC could be a blueprint for other states. Rajasthan High Court recently considered mandatory registration of live-in relationships, closely following Uttarakhand's model. Rajasthan Assembly enacted anti-conversion law. Gujarat is also contemplating a draft UCC modeled on similar lines. These legal trends point towards a broader movement towards a systematic regulation of personal relationships. In India, love and faith are deeply personal and subjective experiences that each individual defines on their own terms. In India, love and faith are deeply personal and subjective experiences that each individual defines on their own terms. These legal developments are not only threatens individual rights but also undermine the very fabric of India's pluralistic society. Doge charge USAID grant, the 47th President of the United States has been making a series of remarks ever since he assumed power at the White House. The controversy surrounding USAID funding for voter turnout in India seems to have been blown out of proportion. Perhaps the ruling dispensation has outright to be thick-skinned. Ought to be thick-skinned, the US should stop meddling in affairs of the other countries, particularly when it does not seem to have incontrovertible proof to substantiate claims. The issue could add to growing tensions between the India and US, which is already under some strain because of the trade issues and concerns over human rights. With conflicting media reports on USAID funds, a lack of clarity could only further damage trust between the two nations. The Indian Prime Minister and the US President must act quickly to clear the air. Numerous attempts have been made in the past 35 years to clean the Yamuna, but there are issues such as having less than the required rate of flow of water to ensure an ecological balance, poor estimates of a surging population, illegal construction, unregulated industrial sewage, and substandard effluent treatment plants. As a single political party is now in power in all Yamuna Basin states, there should no excuse on the part of the government to concerned in coordinating plans. The RTI is now right to deny information. The introduction of right to information was a move that generated great hope among citizens since it recognized them to be rulers of the nation. It empowered them to seek information from the government with dignity and respect. It looked as if the Swaraj that they had missed would be delivered to them. The act codified their fundamental right to information and was one of the best transparency laws in the world. It appeared that it would curb corruption and arbitrariness, with citizens being the vigilance monitors of their government. But it must be conceded it has fallen far short of our expectations, and the state of our democracy is not better. Within a few months, the government realized that this was a transfer of power from public servants to the citizens. In less than a year, it moved to amend the law, which would have weakened the RTI Act, but there was widespread protest by citizens across the nation. Sensing the mood, government dropped the amendments. RTI Act has created information commissions as the first appellate authorities to implement the law. Most of the post of information commissioner was taken up by retired bureaucrats. After working for decades as senior bureaucrats, it was difficult for them to hand over power to citizens and recognize that they were rightful owners of the government. No attempt was made to select people with a record in transparency. Many of them looked at these jobs as post-retirement sincere and worked only for a few hours, while the national average of the disposal of cases by High Court is over 2,500. The national average for disposal of commissioners was less than this. Given the fact that complexity of cases before commissioners is far less than the cases before the high courts, each commissioner should have been clearing at least 5,000 cases in a year. Well, the law mandated for a period of 30 days for the information to be provided and the same period for the first appellate authorities. It did not specify any time limit for the commissioners. Many commissioners began to have pendency of over a year. The right to information was being converted into a right to history. Many ordinary citizens could not pursue the issue of what was now a denial of information. The penal provisions of the RTI Act were the teeth of the act, but most information commissioners were reluctant to use them. The governments delayed appointing commissioners, which only increased the backlogs. The clear message of various High Court judgments was that exemptions listed under Section 8 of the RTI Act were restrictions on the citizen's fundamental right and had to be construed strictly as in the law. Parliament intended most information to be provided and crafted the exemptions carefully. The entire approach to a citizen's right was to information changed in August of 2011 when the Supreme Court held in Central Board of Second CBSE versus Adit Bandyopadhyay and others, some high courts have held that Section 8 of RTI Act is in the nature of an exception to Section 3, which empowers citizens with the right to information, which is a derivative from the freedom of speech, and that therefore Section 8 should be construed strictly, literally, and narrowly. This may not be the correct approach. The clear message of the various High Court's judgments was the exemptions listed under Section 8 of the RTI Act were restrictions on citizens' fundamental right and had to be construed strictly. In paragraph 37, it made a comment without any evidence. Indiscriminate and impractical demands or directions under RTI for disclosure of all and sundry information would be counterproductive as it will adversely affect the efficiency of administration and result in executive getting bogged down with non-productive work of collective and furnishing information. The Act should not be allowed to abused or misused to become a tool to obstruct national development and integration to destroy the peace, tranquility, and harmony among its citizens, nor should it be converted into a tool of oppression or intimidation of honest officials striving to do their duty. Justified treating RTI as an undesirable activity and labeling RTI users as outcasts. It justified not giving information and attacks on the RTI users. Second major blow came with the judgment in Girish Ramchandra Deshpande versus General Central Information Commissioners and others in 2012. RTI applicant Girish Ramchandra Deshpande had sought copies of all memos, shows, cost notice, and censure punishment award to a public servant. He had also sought other details such as his movable, immovable properties and details of investments, lending and borrowing from bank and other financial institutions. This was denied, claiming exemption under Section 8, Class 1, Subclass J. This section exempts information which relates to personal information, the disclosure of which has no relation to any public activity or interest, or which could cause unwarranted intrusion or invasion of the privacy of individual, unless the CPIO is satisfied that the large public interest justifies the disclosure. A simple reading shows that under this clause, personal can be denied if it has apparent no relationship to any public activity or interest, or the disclosure of the said information would cause unwarranted invasion of privacy. The court did not rule on whether the information was an outcome of the public activity or if disclosure would amount to an unwarranted invasion. If denied the information by reading only the first 7 words of the provision and saying it was personal information, most information can link to some person, realizing that it may be difficult for public information officers and other appellate authorities to decide on what constitutes privacy. Parliament gave a simple test in the proviso that information would not be denied to Parliament or legislature, would not be denied to any person. This can only be one meaning that anyone claiming the information would be denied to citizen would make a subjective statement that he would deny the information to Parliament. It is well settled literal interpretation that should be given to the statute. In Nasruddin and others versus Sitaram Agrawal, 2003, court has stated court's jurisdiction to interpret a statute can be invoked when the same is ambiguous. It cannot rewrite or recast legislation. It is also necessary to determine there exists a presumption that legislature has not used any superfluous words. It is well settled that the real intention of the legislation must be gathered from the language used. Girish Ramchand Deshpande amends the RTI Act and has been used as a precedent in 6 subsequent court judgments and has become the gold standard to convert RTI into a RDI right to deny information. Digital Personal Data Protection Act takes cue from this and amends the RTI Act itself. There are other cases in which the word in the law has not been accorded their usual meanings. Section 8, Class 1, Subclass J. The UGC's mandate is to elevate, not strangulate. The UGC has been in the news again while the states pushing Back on its directive on the procedure for appointment of vice chancellors, it is unusual for chief ministers to concern themselves so closely with the minutiae of this kind, but those of Kerala and Tamil Nadu have campaigned against it, terming the directive unconstitutional as it impinges upon matters that are prerogative of the states. They are particularly unhappy that the UGC may be cementing the practice of governors choosing vice chancellor. The UGC has been in the news again, with the states pushing back on its directive on the procedure for appointment of vice chancellors. It is unusual for chief ministers to concern themselves so closely with the minutiae of this kind, but those of Kerala and Tamil Nadu have campaigned against it, terming the directive unconstitutional as it impinges upon matters that are prerogative of the states. They are particularly unhappy that the UGC may be cementing the practice of governors choosing vice chancellors, as the states shoulder much of the burden of financing universities and have a deciding role in instituting them. Their insistence that the elected government, rather than a governor appointed by the centre, have a final say validity. However, the substantive part of the UGC's recent directive was an amended guideline for qualifications for the Vice Chancellor. The requirement that the Vice Chancellor must be an academic has been rescinded, and eligibility has been extended to persons who have distinguished themselves in other fields, including industry. This is actually a rare instance in recent time of a meaningful and potentially gainful innovation by the UGC. Globally, heads of academic institutions have not been always been professional academics. In the US, former secretaries of states are invited to serve as faculty in the best universities. The colleges of Oxford and Cambridge have distinguished themselves by choosing as their heads ex-parliamentarians, writers, journalists, and no one has thought the practice odd. The public very likely sees such appointments as adding value, as most of these individuals have had exceptional careers. India is not stranger to this practice. Over 50 years ago, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi appointed G. Parthasarathi as first Vice Chancellor of the JNU. He had played many roles in the distinguished career of public service and went on to launch JNU as a premier university. So the suggestion that inducting persons from outside to assume leadership is likely damaging or unwarranted. Not only it is far-fetched to decry the UGC recommendation on qualifications for a vice chancellor as unconstitutional and against spirit of federalism, but such complaints detract from a scrutiny of the UGC's record on the parameter by which it ought to be judged. The UGC was established by an Act of Parliament in 1956 with the express intention that it maintains acceptable standards of higher education across the country. What it has instead succeeded in achieving is to have imposed a uniformity of rules and regulations across universities while achieving next to nothing in elevating them to global standards in the dissemination and production of knowledge. The poor preparedness of India's graduates has been flagged in the public. Recently, a judge of Supreme Court lamented the quality of young lawyers practicing in India's courts. Some years ago, the heads of leading companies of the Tata Group spoke of the quality of engineers India is producing. Note that only this is only points to the standard of instruction in the higher education system. Curiously, UGC seems to have nothing to say on quality of education in universities. Instead, it deploys all its resources to procedural matters that are best left to educational institutions. Its interventions encompasses rules on an attendance requirement for students, regulation of faculty time, maintenance of records, of examinations conducted and procedures by which curriculum is chosen. Some of these requirements are part of the apparatus of generalized surveillance of the natives in colonial times. It is unfortunate that they have not been junked. Much of it has no bearing on learning apart from undermining faculty performance, the lifeblood of the university. Having managed to tie down a university's functioning to the last detail, UGC has succeeded in expunging all agency from faculty who once took responsibility for learning outcomes but consider themselves no longer accountable for them. As their wings have been clipped 50 years ago, the university was a freer space. With greater faculty presence, it is difficult to make sense of the developments that the 1991 reforms have been accompanied by more intrusive regulation of Indian universities. Work at the cutting edge of science by Satyan Bose in Dhaka and S. Chandrasekhar in Madras in the early part of last century took place in public universities at a time when India was far poorer. The production of knowledge is an enterprise without borders. Nothing demonstrates this better than the spectacular emergence of DeepSeek, the AI app from China. We must reflect deeply on why India is not player in this game. Globally, universities are one of the sites of production of knowledge, but those in India are not governed with a view to attaining this goal. A high compliance burden due to micromanagement by the regulator and excessive social engineering imposed by political parties have resulted in their persistent underperformance. BSNL has turned a profit but has not become profitable. BSNL reported a quarterly net profit in FY25 in the first 17 years. BSNL has achieved a profit through combination of cost-cutting measures and slight increase in revenue. The company's expenses fell drastically in 21 following a huge reduction in employee count using early voluntary retirement schemes. While cost-cutting measures have helped, issues on the income from front persist. Understandably, BSNL's once flourishing landline business has bottomed out. However, its cellular business too has flattened out since the introduction of Reliance Jio. So that's all in this one. See you in the next. Cost cutting measures have led to a profit in recent quarter, but trouble on the income front persist.